Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep codes behind Britain's rise. I'm Barbara. This is the podcast where we don't just tell stories, we decode the systems behind the stories.
And I'm Alex. We break down the power struggles, the hidden mechanisms, and the turning points that quietly but decisively shaped Britain into a global force.
Today's episode, The Glorious Revolution. How smart taxes built an empire. Okay, here's a wild thought. Imagine a country has a revolution and then raises taxes and nobody riots. I mean, how is that even possible?
It sounds crazy, but it's a masterclass in institutional innovation. See, when most people hear revolution, they think mobs in the streets, governments collapsing, people shouting for liberty and fewer taxes. Take the French Revolution. Liberty, equality, and chopping off heads over bread and tax burdens.
Totally. It's always down with the king, down with the taxman. So what did the Brits do? Just sip tea and politely agree to pay more?
Not quite. Before the Glorious Revolution in 1688, the British government was chronically broke. They barely pulled in £2 million a year in tax revenue.
Which actually sounds like a lot for back then.
It does, but here's the kicker. Taxpayers were coughing up closer to £5 million annually.
Wait, what? People paid $5 million, but the government only got $2 million? Where did the rest go? Into some kind of royal black hole?
More like a leaky bucket. The problem was a chaotic system called tax farming. The Crown outsourced tax collection to hundreds of private agents, middlemen, who took a huge cut for themselves. It was corrupt, fragmented, and utterly frustrating. Taxpayers were angry, but not just at the Crown. They were mad at the whole broken system.
That's a bureaucratic horror movie. People pay, the state's broke, and some shady middleman is getting rich. So after 1688, what? Did they stumble upon a magic money tree?
Not a tree, but definitely a smarter root system. After the Glorious Revolution, something radical happened. The government started pulling in over £6 million annually. And the economy? Still stable. No revolts.
Hold up. They paid more and didn't rebel? That's tax sorcery. So what changed?
The system. The entire tax collection process was overhauled. Instead of relying on greedy contractors, the new regime created a centralized professional bureaucracy. Civil servants, paid by the state, took over.
So they kicked out the middlemen and brought in the pros. That's it?
That's it. And the results were immediate. Less waste, more revenue, and, importantly, more trust. People could see what they were paying, who they were paying, and where the money was going.
So it wasn't less tax. It was smarter tax. I guess that makes people less angry.
Exactly. Transparency and predictability built legitimacy. And here's the big picture. This administrative upgrade gave Britain a massive edge, especially over France.
Ah, yes, good old France. Twice the size, 3 times the population, and somehow broke all the time.
That's because France stuck with a medieval tax system, privileged nobles, fragmented jurisdictions, and collectors with zero oversight. Their system was a sieve, Britain's a funnel.
So the British Empire wasn't funded by looting colonies first, but by fixing spreadsheets?
Pretty much. Tax reform sounds boring, but it was revolutionary. It turned Britain from a bankrupt monarchy into a fiscal military powerhouse.
That's insane. So the real revolution wasn't in the streets. It was in the ledgers.
Exactly. And that's how a smarter tax system didn't just avoid a rebellion, it built an empire.
So taxes weren't just about paying bills. They were the battlefield. Seriously, Alex? When did money turn into a fight over freedom?
Right after 1688, smarter taxation built Britain's strength. But to understand why it was so revolutionary, we have to go deeper.
Taxation didn't just fund the state. It became the foundation of Britain's entire institutional design. So it's not about pounds and pence, but about principles? Okay, you're dangerously close to a boring lecture, Alex. Give me the juicy part.
Here's the juicy part. Almost every major uprising in English history, it started with a tax. But unlike elsewhere, English taxation wasn't just about money. It was about property rights, and for the English, that meant freedom.
Property rights, like this land is mine, not the king's? That's surprisingly rebellious.
Exactly. In many empires, the Ottomans, Chinese dynasties, even continental Europe, land was the monarch's to give and take. Their rule was absolute. Their word was law.
The emperor as the ultimate landlord. No room for debate.
Right. But in England, the king was more like a CEO, hired by the board, the nobility. They owned the land, not him. And unless they agreed to it, he couldn't just dip into their pockets.
So the king had to stick to his own budget? Now that's a frustrating job description for a monarch.
Deeply frustrating and deeply important. Every time a king tried to tax without consent, it wasn't seen as policy, it was theft. And in England, taxation without consent meant rebellion.
Okay, but how? What kind of constitutional sorcery are we talking about?
No sorcery, just centuries of brutal negotiation. From Henry VIII to Charles I, English kings kept trying to claw back control over taxes and armies. And every time, Parliament pushed back. Sometimes, the king lost his crown. Sometimes, he lost his head.
Whoa, so this wasn't just politics over tea. This was high stakes, heads on the line stuff.
Absolutely. And through that struggle, England developed something unique, a system of shared power. The king wasn't above the law, he was bound by it. Parliament controlled the purse strings, and the nobles, they remained powerful, but never became royal puppets.
So they spread the weight. Not one pillar of power, but a whole scaffold holding the state together.
Exactly, and it worked. This wasn't a revolution in one weekend, it was built slowly and painfully on battles over taxation.
Still, I get the king's side. War costs money. You can't exactly crowdfund a navy.
True, but England's genius wasn't in saying no taxes. It was in creating a system where the people, through Parliament, got to ask the tough questions. Why this tax? How much? Where will it go?
So Parliament became the budget watchdog, not just a rubber stamp, a real counterweight.
Exactly. It became the institutional firewall against royal overreach. And in doing so, it protected property rights not just for the elite, but for the entire political system. That's what made taxation in Britain so much more than a financial issue. It became a moral one, a constitutional one, a question of who really holds the keys to the kingdom.
So, in the end, taxes didn't just buy cannons or castles. They built the rules of the game. That's honestly genius.
And messy, and hard fought. But ultimately, yes, genius. Because in Britain, taxing the people wasn't about squeezing wealth. It was about defining power and limiting it. A compass that pointed the way forward for the modern state.
So, Alex, we've talked about how taxes were never just numbers in Britain. They were battlegrounds for property rights. And we've seen how the Glorious Revolution made taxation smarter. But what did that look like in practice? What system did they scrap, and what did they build instead?
Great question. To understand the brilliance of Britain's reforms, we need to look at the monster they killed: tax farming. It was Europe's favorite fiscal shortcut for centuries, and one of the most corrosive systems ever devised.
Tax farming? Sounds like something medieval accountants dreamt up after too much wine. Were they growing taxes in rows?
Not quite. Imagine this. The king doesn't collect taxes himself. Instead, he sells that job, literally. Private individuals, called tax farmers, would pay the crown a big chunk of cash up front. In return, they got the exclusive right to go out and collect taxes from the public. Whatever they squeezed out beyond what they paid the king, that was their profit. No oversight, no limit.
Hold on, so the crown just auctioned off the right to shake down the people? That's not a tax system, that's a government-endorsed mugging.
Exactly. And to broke monarchs with lazy bureaucracies, it was tempting. First, it was convenient. No messy administration, no chasing payments. Second, it shifted the risk. If there was famine or revolt, the king didn't care. He got paid up front. The tax farmer ate the loss.
So it was like outsourcing your worst job to the most ruthless contractor you could find?
Spot on. And Charles, I took this logic to a new level of absurdity. Desperate for cash, he pushed the infamous ship tax without Parliament's consent and tried to soften the blow by having Queen Henrietta Maria star in a ballet.
A ballet? For taxes? That's peak delusion. Did it work?
Did it work? Public outrage soared and compliance tanked. But imagine if tax farming had been used. Charles wouldn't have cared about rebellion or empty coffers as long as someone paid him up front.
But yikes. So they had every reason to squeeze people dry and zero reason to be fair?
That's right. They operated in secrecy, used intimidation, and drained communities just to fatten their margins. The crown lost control, not just of tax rates, but of its moral authority. And worse, it sold off long-term revenue for short-term cash. The tax farmers got rich, the state got crumbs, the people got fleeced.
So it wasn't just corrupt, it was stupid. The government basically auctioned off its own future.
Exactly. Pause. By the late 1600s, tax farming was widely seen as semi-legal plunder. Public hatred boiled over, and Britain reached a turning point, either reform or rot from within.
So what did they actually do to stop this madness?
Two bold moves, simple in concept, radical in impact. First, nationalization. The state took direct control of tax collection. No more middlemen, no more profiteering.
The crown did its own dirty work?
Yes, and that changed everything. Second, they professionalized it. Britain built a permanent tax bureaucracy, civil servants on government payroll, trained, supervised, and held accountable.
So instead of bandits with permits, they had bureaucrats with clipboards?
Pretty much. And this shift didn't just clean up corruption. It laid the groundwork for modern fiscal governance. It meant stable revenue, enforceable law, and the rise of what we now call the tax state. Britain stopped bleeding its people for private gain and started harnessing taxes for public power.
So in 1713, Parliament finally slammed the door shut on tax farming. They fully nationalized and professionalized tax collection. But this wasn't just some bureaucratic cleanup, right?
Not even close. It was a seismic shift. Under the old tax farming system, everything was chaotic and fragmented.
Okay, good riddance to the tax farmers. But why 1713? Was it just about getting more cash into the treasury, or was something bigger going on?
Definitely something bigger.
Under tax farming, the system was fragmented beyond belief. Each tax farmer operated their own little kingdom. Revenue was chaotic, uncoordinated. If you want to see how bad it could get, just look across the channel to France.
Ah, France, the gold standard for fiscal dysfunction in this series, apparently.
Absolutely. The French king literally stored different taxes in separate physical coffers. One chest for the salt tax, one for the alcohol tax, one for land, and so on. Over 100 separate treasure boxes, all physically locked away in Paris.
Wait, what? That's not a treasury. That's a treasure hunt. No wonder their finances were a mess.
It was a bureaucratic nightmare. When France needed money, officials had to scramble to find which chest had funds left. Nothing was centralized. By the end of the American Revolutionary War in 1783, their finance minister was spending months just figuring out how much money France actually had. The country was broke, and nobody even knew how broke.
It's like running a household without ever checking your bank account, then acting surprised when the lights go out.
Exactly. That's why France's problem wasn't just bad policy, it was a broken system. Meanwhile, Britain, after 1688, built the opposite. Centralized collection, professional oversight, clearer ledgers. And over the next century of near-constant wars between the two, France lost again and again.
So they weren't just defeated on the battlefield, they were defeated on the balance sheet.
Right. Britain didn't win because of tax reform alone, but tax reform gave them a sturdy platform to even compete. Think of it as the foundation of a great structure, stable, well-measured, and crucially, able to scale.
And without it, the whole building would crumble.
Exactly. But here's the kicker. Even this wasn't enough. Better tax collection fixed how money came in, but it didn't solve the question of how money was managed. That required one more piece, the third pillar in what became a powerful tripod.
Wait, there's a missing leg? Now you've got me curious. What was it?
Britain's final game-changing innovation was financial. It wasn't just about raising money. It was about creating trust in money. In our next episode, we'll uncover the creation of the world's first central bank, the Bank of England.
Now that sounds like money magic. I'm ready for some financial wizardry.
It's going to change the way you think about modern economics. If today's look into tax reform sparked your curiosity,
Then be sure to follow, leave a review, and share the deep codes behind Britain's rise with someone who loves their history shaken and stirred. See you next time.